You might consider caramel a one-ingredient wonder. Sugar. Okay, 2 if you're counting the water. Many recipes suggest cooking it until the color reaches a specific shade. As you can see here, I have a chart made out of actual caramel, ranging from pale to light to amber to medium to dark to burnt. These are beautiful shades, and today I'll demystify making caramel in 4 of my favorite recipes. A salted caramel 6-layer chocolate cake, second to none. And Alfajores, these wonderful layered cookies using a Dulce de Leche. And a buttery pound cake, this gorgeous cake, with a caramel glaze. And chocolate caramel cookie bars, the best caramel you've ever tasted. Today, all of this on Martha Bakes. It's really hard to imagine a dessert more decadent than 6 layers of chocolate cake and salted caramel covered with gorgeous swirls of chocolate frosting. All the elements are surprisingly uncomplicated and can be made in stages, and actually they taste better made a day or 2 in advance. Start with 1½ cups of Dutch processed cocoa. And it's good to put all of these ingredients right in a sieve. It's 3 cups of all-purpose flour. And we're just sifting this right into our mixing bowl. Now this is getting a little full, so I will start to sift. You can see that dark cocoa mixing with the flour. Here's the last cup of flour. And we also need 3 cups of granulated sugar. And this can be sifted also right in these other ingredients. Just go a little at a time. It smells so good. That cocoa powder is so rich. And I put in 1 cup of sugar. Now we need 2 more. And a few more dry ingredients, like 1 tablespoon of baking soda, 1½ teaspoons of baking powder, and make sure your baking powder is fresh, and 1½ teaspoons of salt. So I think I have everything. Now, this is an unusual cake because you don't cream the butter and the sugar and add the eggs to that. You start with the sifted dry ingredients. Add 1½ cups of warm water, 4 whole eggs, ½ cup plus 2 tablespoons of safflower oil, and 1½ cups of buttermilk. Buttermilk makes such a moist, delicious cake. Oh, and don't forget 2 teaspoons of best vanilla extract. And this is enough for 3 9-inch by 2-inch layer cakes. The pans have been buttered with softened butter, then lined in the bottom with a piece of parchment. Buttered again, both sides and bottom, and then dusted heavily with more of that Dutch processed cocoa. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. So that's 1 cake. Second cake. And don't waste any of this good batter. It's so pretty. So there we have it. Now bake these cakes in a 350-degree oven until the cakes are set and a toothpick inserted in the center of each comes out clean. That'll take just about 35 minutes. So now we're making the caramel filling. As you can see, the cakes have come out of the oven. They're glistening chocolate brown. To make the caramel, 1/4 cup of water, 1/4 cup of light corn syrup, and 4 whole cups of sugar. I have it on high flame, so I swirl and I tilt. And for any crystals that might be forming around the top of the mixture, use a soft brush and just run a little bit of excess water around to prevent crystals from forming. Another way to prevent crystals is to cover this and let the steam rise and fall back down the sides of the pan. This is going to take about 14 minutes. So you can see that all the sugar has dissolved. It's darkening in color. Turn off your heat, very important, before you pour in the heavy cream. And you'll see it'll bubble. Stir with the spoon. And be careful, you don't want this to boil over. And cook until it reaches the soft ball, 238 degrees. When it's 238, remove your thermometer. Pour this into a bowl to cool. Now immediately stir in 1 teaspoon of salt. This will have to cool, and that's going to take around 15 minutes. So now I'm making the filling, which is this lovely salty caramel filling, incorporating 1 cup of butter cut into small pieces. And then this will cool further, and we'll make the chocolate frosting. And now for the frosting, 2 sticks unsalted butter, 1/2 cup of confectioner's sugar, a pinch of salt, and while that's creaming, dissolve 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder. This is the Dutch process. In 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of warm water. So you're using cocoa as well as 1 pound of semi-sweet chocolate melted and cooled. Add the chocolate and then add your cocoa. I'll mix it one last time with the scraper and then let the icing sit for about 30 minutes. So now we have 2 cakes which are slightly topped, the dome's taken off, and split in half. For those of you who are novices, to split a cake, it might be a little intimidating. So you can measure and you can mark your half of a layer with toothpicks around the perimeter. So this cake is approximately 1.5 inches, so 3/4 of an inch you can just mark around, and then you can cut with your knife on the top of the toothpicks. That way it'll give you a pretty even layer. So we're going to put approximately 3/4 of a cup of this rich, thick caramel right on top of our layers. And spread it all over the layer. So now get your next layer back on. More caramel. You get the idea. So this is what the cake looks like, all layered. Now, this is the serving pedestal. And to keep that clean, I like to insert my little pieces of parchment or wax paper right around the cake like this. Now, the pedestal's protected, and I am ready to swirl on my chocolate buttercream. This is such a thick and beautiful buttercream. And using an offset spatula, draw some of that frosting down the sides. You want it to go all the way down to the bottom of the supporting cardboard. So if your cake is a little uneven, now's the time with this beautiful frosting to sort of level it off. And now for the crowning glory, this beautiful flaky sea salt. Now pull out your little pieces of parchment. The mess is primarily on the paper, and the cake can be chilled, or if you can't wait, you can serve it right now. Chocolate and caramel, a match made in heaven. Alfajores are traditional sandwich cookies found throughout South America. They are melt-in-your-mouth shortbread rounds filled with a dulce de leche, a creamy caramel confection made from condensed milk. And I have 2 cans of condensed milk, and I am putting the contents into the top of a double boiler. This is the way you can make your own dulce de leche at home. So here, 2 cans of condensed milk in the top of a double boiler with a tight-fitting lid. This is going to cook for 5 hours until it turns a nice caramelly brown color. You'll have to continually add boiling water to the bottom of the double boiler. Now for the cookies themselves, in the food processor bowl, 4 cups of all-purpose flour. And to that, we're going to add 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of confectioner's sugar. This is a very simple, delicious shortbread cookie. So just pulse the flour and sugar together and add your butter. 1.5 cups of well-chilled butter cut into 1/4-inch cubes. And we want to mix the butter totally into the flour and sugar. And now add your water. Half a cup. You see how it's coming down off the sides and forming pretty much a ball. Okay. And we're going to make 2 squares. We'll divide this into half. It's very sticky. And just form this into nice flat circles. Discs, I like to call them. Now this dough has to be chilled for at least an hour before you start to roll out the dough. So here's a round of the chilled dough. Put it on a very lightly floured rolling surface and roll it to a scant 1/4 of an inch thick. And roll in one direction only. So cut your cookies to anywhere from 1.5 to 1 3/4 in diameter. This cuts so beautifully. You can see how neat the cookies are, really perfect discs. And cut as many as you can and get them right onto parchment-lined baking sheets. And try to minimize the amount of leftover dough. It really helps because you can re-roll this dough, but the cookies are not as nice as the first cut. And these are going to be sandwich cookies, so you want every disc to match every other disc. There are 24 cookies on this tray. On half of them, sprinkle a little bit of glistening sanding sugar. This will be the top half of the cookie. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. They take 15 minutes to bake. So I am using a tiny 2-teaspoon scoop to put a modicum amount of the Dulce de Leche. Look at the color, isn't it great? And it's gotten very thick. Just put that right on the unsugared half of the cookie and press the top on. So these cookies are meant to be eaten immediately, but they're so beautiful and they would be great served with some homemade sorbet or ice cream. They're very tasty, and for anyone who loves caramel, an extra delicious cookie. They're very popular. Sometimes a little gilding the lily, as I like to say, is what transforms a good cake into a memorable cake. And that is exactly what Matt Lewis from Baked, which is a bakery, has done with his longtime favorite recipe for buttery pound cake with the addition of a delicious salty caramel glaze. Matt, welcome.
Thanks so much.
So nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
You're a busy man, baking away.
Yeah,
breads and cakes and pies and tarts and all my favorite things. And now a wonderful buttery pound cake, which I love. I love pound cakes very much, and I love the idea of a caramel glaze.
Well, it's funny, you know, my Scottish grandmother, and she made this, haggis, which I'm not a big haggis fan.
Me either.
And shortbread. So this is kind of vaguely what I remember.
Do you have a shortbread recipe?
I do have a shortbread recipe.
Next time.
Next time.
Okay.
So we're going to actually make a version of Grandma's cake. And what we're going to do is sift together all of our dry ingredients. We have a cup of all-purpose flour.
So measure first, then sift?
Measure first, then sift, always. And then we did replace a little bit of the all-purpose flour with some cake flour.
Oh, so 3/4 of a cup of cake flour.
And, you know, the cake flour will make a much more delicate texture to this cake.
So 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder.
And you know, something else, my grandmother never sifted. Do you always sift?
Well, I usually use a whisk now.
Yeah.
I like sifting. I think it's
all
kind
the nibbly
important.
bits out.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, I'm going to put together our butter and sugar.
So what kind of butter do you use?
This is just a cultured butter, which just means it has a little more fat and a lot more flavor. It's good.
Salty or unsalty?
Unsalted, because we're going to add salt back to the recipe.
Okay.
And then I'm going to add my sugar.
So it's 12 tablespoons of butter, 1 and what, 1/4
1
cup?
1/4 cups of sugar, and then we're just going to beat this up. You want your butter to be softened.
So room temperature to start.
Room temperature to start, and then you're going to beat this about 4 to 5 minutes until it's really fluffy. While I'm doing this, if you want to prepare the pan.
So just soften butter?
Soften butter, a little parchment. The parchment makes it really easy, obviously, to pull out of the pan.
Oh, okay. In a professional bakery, do you butter all the pans, or is there something else you use?
We actually butter all of our pans.
You do?
Yeah, we have to. And I'm going to add some vanilla, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, right into the butter-sugar mixture. And just mix that up just for about 15 seconds.
So I just laid a piece of parchment right across the bottom of the pan.
Perfect.
And so you'll be able to pull it out, right?
You're gonna pull it right out, 15 minutes. You don't want this thing to cool completely because the sugars will start to stick to the edge of the pan.
Okay.
I'm gonna throw some eggs in here. 2 eggs and 2 egg yolks. And you could do this while the mixture is running. And add the other 2 eggs one at a time. And then once this combines, we're gonna alternate our dry ingredients with our heavy cream. So this is a really healthy pound cake.
But it has cream in it.
That's not healthy at all. Now just alternate between the liquid and dry.
Okay.
Put about 1/3 of the dry ingredients in first. Mix it up just a little bit. And then you could kind of stream in the liquid ingredients, which is just, in this case, the heavy cream.
So how many of these cakes do you make at a time?
We do about 22 to 26 at a time.
Wow.
Once the eggs go in and the flour goes in, you don't want to overmix it. It will get really tough otherwise.
There.
And add it to the pan.
Oh, I didn't flour this. I should flour it, right?
Yeah, let's put a little flour in there just to keep it extra from sticking.
So just a little bit and bang it around, right?
And then pound cake is a little persnickety once you put it in the oven. We're gonna put it in here, but you really need to keep an eye on it. It tends to brown a little before the actual whole cake is done, which is totally fine. That means all you have to do is tent it halfway through baking.
Okay, with aluminum foil?
Just a little bit of aluminum foil. Kind of just even it
Now,
out.
does
in the
this
pan.
cake crack on the top like most pound cakes?
It gets a nice, it's not as obvious crack as some of the pound cakes, but it has a nice kind of golden dome. And then this is gonna bake up for about an hour.
What temperature?
350 degrees.
So the glaze.
Let's make a very quick caramel-like glaze. And again, I'm using the cultured butter and heavy cream, 1/2 cup. But the main ingredient in this one is our dark brown sugar, which is 1/2 cup of packed sugar.
Ah, it's dark brown.
So you want to just melt the butter at first, just until the butter starts to melt, and then we're going to boil.
Now, is that enough holes, or should I have
Oh, that's
more?
perfect.
Okay. Matt said to make lots of holes because the caramel syrup permeates the whole cake.
All right, so you can see my butter's just starting to melt. My sugar's almost completely melted. We're gonna bring this up to a boil, and you want this to boil for about 1.5 minutes.
So there it's all boiling. You wouldn't pour it boiling over the cake.
Absolutely not. You want
Okay.
to take this off the heat. Once it's been boiling for about 1.5 minutes, you're going to add a little bit of fleur de sel. Almost
3/4 of a teaspoon?
3/4 of a teaspoon.
Oh, okay.
Whisk it together.
So while it's still hot, add some confectioner sugar.
Yeah, let's add a little confectioner sugar. This will give the caramel some body.
I always sift confectioner sugar just to get out those lumps. Do you?
Always. Oh, perfect.
That smells so good, Matt.
Oh, so this is perfect. So our caramel's nice and thick.
So you don't brush it on?
No,
You
we're
pour
gonna
it?
go pour it right
Oh,
on.
good, okay.
And it's easier at home if you want to pour it into a glass measure cup. Get all of it out if possible. Perfect. And if you want to do the honors and kind of
Yeah.
glaze our cake, and don't be afraid, go heavy.
So do it slowly.
You want to do it slowly so it fills in all of the holes, and that caramel is going to seep into the cake and add a lot of flavor when you cut into it.
Yum.
And you want this to set for about 15 to 20 minutes before you slice into it.
And now sprinkle it while it's still wet.
Yes, sprinkle it while it's still wet. Just a couple pinches. A little goes a long way with the salt. Beautiful.
There.
Beautiful.
Let it cool. This salty caramel glaze is the perfect accompaniment to a buttery pound cake. Thanks for sharing, and I'm sure it will become a favorite of our viewers.
Oh, I hope so.
Thanks.
Thank you.
If the combination of chocolate, caramel, and shortbread makes you weak in the knees, you're going to love these chocolate caramel cookie bars. They're aimed to satisfy the most demanding sweet tooth. They start with a brown sugar shortbread crust. Very easy to make. Basically, 9 tablespoons of butter. At room temperature, add 1/4 cup of light brown sugar and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And add 1.5 cups of flour. So you see it is a rich shortbread crust. Let that get all mixed up. There, perfect. And now this dough will be pressed right into the bottom of your 9-inch baking pan. I've buttered the pan, then lined it with 2 sheets of crisscrossed parchment, buttered the parchment again, and lightly floured it. And these binder clips hold the paper in place. So just put all this dough right in the bottom of the pan and press it in an even layer. You can use the back of your knuckles like this, or you can use your fingertips, whatever works best for you. And it's a very thin layer of dough, actually, but just enough to give a beautiful base for these cookie bars. So now to flatten, you could use the bottom of a cup measure like this too, just to really even it out. So there, it does really bake nicely, and 350-degree oven, bake until lightly browned. That's going to take about 30 minutes. And now for the caramel. 1.5 cups of granulated sugar with 1/4 cup of water. And it's just starting to get a little bit of color. This is the same process that we've used before to make the caramel. You want a nice amber color. So turn off your heat, add your 1 cup of heavy cream, carefully because it might splatter. And you can stir with a whisk. See how it erupts like a volcano? Be careful. 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 6 tablespoons of butter. Stir this all together. Now you can turn the heat back on. You want everything to be dissolved, and bringing it back to a boil will ensure that. And as it's boiling, you can now pour it over your beautiful milk chocolate, 10.5 ounces, finely chopped. The chocolate will melt, and this will be a glossy, beautiful caramel. Whisk until all the chocolate is melted. So now let this cool for at least 15 minutes. You don't want to pour it onto the crust when it's this hot. 15 minutes or so, and you can pour it right over the top. Looks good. Beautiful. And you can just get into each corner. And you really don't want bubbles in your caramel, so you can tap it like that. And after tapping, if you still have just a few bubbles remaining, you can poke them with a toothpick. So chill this at least 4 hours, overnight even better. So these have chilled overnight, and you can lift them out of the pan, and they release very nicely. And then cut into not very large squares. These are very, very rich. So hear that nice crunch? Good to wipe your knife in between each cut. Just turn and start in the middle. A very modern looking dessert. One last thing before you serve, a little dot of sea salt, flaky sea salt right on top. This is a modern and beautiful dessert to serve the chocolate caramel lovers in your family. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Martha Bakes. Drizzle the inside of 2 glasses with caramel sauce. Set aside. Place 4 scoops of vanilla ice cream, 1/4 cup milk, 2 tablespoons of toasted pecans, 2 tablespoons caramel, and a pinch of sea salt in a blender. Blend until smooth. Pour into the prepared glasses. Garnish with chopped pecans and sea salt. Serve immediately with a straw.